What's up, Bobby? Thank you so much for jumping on the AIM podcast.
Thank you for having me, man. Good to be here.
I'm excited. We got a guest from London, man. How's everything going in London?
I mean, it was sunny 2 minutes ago. It's raining right now. Kind of sums us up over here, but no, all is good. All is good. Can't grumble.
And that's pretty much the norm there. Like rainstorms come out of nowhere.
Yeah, kind of nowhere, but this one's lasted for quite some time. I don't know how many British pals you've got, but we had like a non-existent summer. So it was like 2 weeks long, and then that was it, straight into autumn. But
Jeez, that's crazy. So I'm currently based in the western part of the state of North Carolina in the mountains, and we get rain all the time. A lot of people say Western is just it's like a rainstorm, but yeah, man, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. I really enjoyed to get to know you. I think it's cool kind of how we connected and just kind of built a relationship. And I admire a lot of the things you're doing. So I think this episode is going to be a lot of fun, just kind of diving into some of your stories, what you're doing and your mindset.
appreciate that. Looking forward to it. It's been exciting.
Yeah, well, let's dive into your story. Just kind of set the context, just kind of going back from, how you got to this point. Obviously, we can break it up a little bit because you've done a lot of really cool things, but kind of talk to me a little bit more about your background, like how you got into this whole game.
Into fitness.
Yeah, into fitness.
Yeah,
First.
I mean, fitness, it's kind of led me into everything that we've spoken about and everything that I'm doing in life. It's kind of stems from fitness. I mean, my background was judo, I guess, is the crux of it, of the foundations of who I am and where I'm at today. So I grew up in like a real rough part of town in East London. I don't know how much what your geography is like of London, but think of Brooklyn back in the day before it was cool and the place to be. So it was super rough back then. Apparently I used to love to wrestle. My buddies used to have sleepovers when I was like 6, 7 years old, and they used to come over, and mum said that they stopped coming over because I would wrestle them and I'd always, want to have a little tussle and fight. So between sort of expending some energy and keeping safe when I grew up in a rough part of town, she took me to judo when I was 6 years old, and that's where it started.
No, that's incredible. What you think it was more of your mom kind of getting you into it? Well, you said you love to wrestle, but what was it about judo that really got you like really passionate about it?
I mean, yeah, it was mum. It was totally her influence that got me into it. I think it was probably, in all honesty, we have no one in the family that has ever done any martial arts or any kind of fighting. Quite a peaceful family. And I think it was probably, it was just the location of the judo club was like 5 minutes around the corner from where I lived. It was fitted into my mother's schedule, nice and simple. So that was probably the first part of it. And then, like I said, I was kind of a rough kid. I was a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but like I said, I used to just like a bit of rough and tumble. So it was just a straight mix. I'd go to judo, and I mean, listen, judo at 6 years old, it's pretty much, that it's just all about, getting the kids knowing how to fall properly, having some fun, getting a bit hot and sweaty, and just like expending some energy. So when the coaches send them back to their parents, they're knackered and they get a bit of an easier ride. So at that age, I couldn't really identify what it was about it. I made some cool friends from back then that, 35 years on, I'm still tight with them now. So that was that. But for 4 or 5 years after that, I was doing that once or twice a week. And then it takes you up to about 11 or 12 when, I'm not the tallest of guys. I'm not in your league, like basketball, that's for sure. The people I went to fight were up here. But I was quite stocky and quite strong naturally and quite fit. So even by the age of sort of 11 and 12, I think coaches identified me as someone that had certain attributes. I don't think technically I was particularly that great. My coordination was good, but everything else was in the right place. So I think around about 11 or 12, that's when the coaches then put a little bit of focus on me. And then that's when it really took off. And then by the age of 15, I was winning school national championships. I was winning British national championships, and then got a place on the GB team at the age of 15. And that's when it was like, oh shit, like I'm pretty good at this. I'm not one of those kids at school that, there's always someone at school that's good at this and good at that and good at that. I was good at one thing, back then, and that was judo. So yeah, at the age of 15, that was like, right, time to dial in.
No, that's incredible. And for people that don't like have a really strong background or understanding of judo, how would you describe it to someone on a very basic level, just kind of the core of judo?
The core of judo. So the points of judo are to throw someone, to hold them down, or to submit them. Submit them, you would choke them out, you just strangle them. Don't want to scare people off. You'd strangle them or armbar them. But it has very sort of similar nuances to jiu-jitsu, but judo is 90% standing. So you start on your feet, and 90% of the time you're up on your feet fighting, unless it goes to the ground and you score a smaller point, and then it will continue onto the ground. So then you've got about 10% of the sport is, we call it newaza, which is groundwork. And then jiu-jitsu is pretty much flipped in reverse. So sort of 90% of it is on the ground and 10% standing. But there's, the whole point of jiu-jitsu is trying to grab someone and trying to throw them and try and throw them flat on their back. And that's the equivalent of a knockout in boxing.
No, that's super cool. Yeah, I want to go. Do you have highlights? Can I go check out some of your highlights?
Yeah, there's a few on there, but listen, I'm 41 now, so I'm a little bit older, and there wasn't as much social media knocking around then as there is now. Sadly, you know, everyone's got their highlight reels on their Instagram of their fighting. I'm like, damn, I missed that wave. But there's a few sort of grainy VHS bits and pieces out there.
Let's go. What is the predominant like training of it, of like your peak in judo look like? Is it mostly strength? And I'm sure there's a lot of conditioning too to keep you primed. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it was a real balance. Judo is, a judo match on a minimum used to last 5 minutes. It's now slightly shortened to 4 minutes. So they've evolved somewhat. So it makes it more entertaining. So they've changed the rules and time and scores to make it more entertaining to the public. Because back when I was competing, you know, there really wasn't a huge amount of knowledge. If someone didn't know judo and they turn it on TV, it just looks like two grown men in like a pair of pajamas, just like hugging it out. But back in the day, it was a minimum fight was 5 minutes. If no one had scored, it would then go into something called golden score. So you'd stop at 5 minutes, and it was a true 5 minutes, by the way. So we would be grip fighting, we'd be throwing, we'd be there, and then the ref would stop you to get you off the floor if there was like no activity, or if you're gripping and someone's defending, and then the referee would stop. But when the referee stops, the clock would stop. So it's not like football, or I guess it's much like basketball where the clock stops everything. So it's like a true 5 minutes. There's no time to be wasted.
For sure.
But if you get to the end of the 5 minutes and then there's no one scored, or if people have scored and it's an equal, it's a tie, then they do golden score. So then you reset your belt, and then the clock goes again for another 4 to 5 minutes until the first person scores. So it could be up to 10 minutes. So despite it being not like an endurance sport, there's still there's a big element of cardiovascular. But in that cardiovascular, there's also huge amount of power. There's huge amount of strength, mobility, flexibility. So it's one of those sports that really does steal little bits from every vertical within like fitness as we know it. It's brutal, man. I mean, I'm slightly biased, but I think, you know, it's a hell of a sport, and I think it's one of the toughest sports out there.
No doubt. And you bring up a cool one that I didn't really think of much. And I'm sure the mobility and just the flexibility of like moving your body is probably one of the most important things. Cause that's something as a basketball player, like I said, even now, like I'm trying to get better at it now. My career is over, but like my hips were so tight, but that limits you on defense. Like there's little places where you can really make huge improvements in your like performance if you have better mobility and flexibility.
Yeah. I mean, so mobility with us is, the benefits from that would be getting off throws, right? So you would have someone that would come in with an inner sweep, and if you were tight, you know, you couldn't ride a throw, you couldn't get your leg off, you couldn't get out, and you're just being flipped straight over. So it's quite a good incentive to work on your mobility. I wasn't as flexible as I should have been, you know, looking back. There was a few times I was like, oh, damn, I should have worked on that a little bit. But because of all those attributes that I was telling you, the strength, the power, the endurance, you know, it was tough to get it all in, you know. Alongside all of that, I was saying to you earlier that, you know, there's no money in judo. There's a fair bit now, And again, because of social media and Instagram and paid partnerships, and you basically have a shop window for brands to jump on you, and if you fit tight, if you're a good fit with them, then they can sponsor you. But back then it was nothing like that, so I had to work. That's where I started coaching people. I was a personal trainer, worked in a few gyms in London, had a great time doing that, but that was to support what I was doing in judo. So between getting my strength training in, getting my cardiovascular training, getting the judo sparring in, then getting the judo technical work in, and then, by the way, getting up at 4:30 every morning for 6-7 years to go and train my clients, it was a lot to do. So looking back, I probably could have managed my time a little bit better, but we say that in hindsight.
No, I love it. A saying that I talk about a lot on this podcast and just kind of my brand is like energy creates opportunity. And I think when you find people who have a lot of energy and a lot of passion for life, like their opportunities are a lot larger than other people. And I think, a lot of people are like, oh, it must be nice to train David Beckham, or it must be nice to do this or that. But like when you wake up and have energy and you put passion into life, like good things happen. And I truly believe that. So you kind of brought it up, but I want to dive into that. Like, how did you get into the coaching side? What did that look like? Was that a passion that you've always had, like helping people? Or I know you said it was kind of also just kind of from a finance standpoint to create some revenue, but like, what did that look like and how did that even come about?
Yeah, listen, I shouldn't do any disservice because it's a huge passion of mine. So it was, but however, if someone said to me, right, you can train full time and I'm going to give you like a footballer's salary, like 50 grand a week or 100 grand a week, and you don't have to go and coach people, like, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't have coached anyone. I would have just focused on the judo. But yeah, it was at the time, there was not much money in there, but it was always just something I loved. Listen, I spent majority of my time in the gym, and even to this day, despite, I'm not competing, but I still take advice from other coaches. And, certainly, so when I was competing, I had my own S&C coach, despite, training to become a PT, and I knew what to do. I like you said, by the way, getting energy from other people, so I saw some of the best coaches out there to come and coach me and just to elevate my training and competition. But I think it just came naturally from spending a huge amount of time in the gym, understanding that it was a model that was flexible. I did a lot of training, so I was able to training and traveling. So I was able to move some clients around. I was able to train people and educate people that if I wasn't there, they would be able to train themselves. So it was just something that it happened naturally, but I wasn't prepared to I didn't understand that it would take me where I am now and the love that I have for coaching people and giving back. I absolutely love it.
No, I love that. I think it's so powerful when people find a way to make an impact in their life on somebody else, whether it be through fitness, whether it be through business, whether it be through like whatever it looks like. It's all different. Like you and I obviously love fitness and helping people, but that's one of the things you do. I don't want to label you as a fitness guy because you do a lot of cool stuff, but I find it so interesting when people can find how they can do that, their way, their avenue to help and make an impact. And I think it's really powerful.
But by the way, you talk about not wanting to say that I'm just a fitness guy, but everything that I've done in my life has sort of boiled back down to fitness, So after I retired from judo, I was fortunate to work in a number of verticals that I wasn't prepared to. I was a judo fighter, training with Team GB over in Chelsea in London, and then downstairs, unbeknownst to me, film director Guy Ritchie used to train jiu-jitsu downstairs. And then he came upstairs and was doing a little bit of groundwork with some of the GB judo boys. To be fair to him, Guy is actually a black belt under Henzo Gracie himself. So,
wow.
he's legit. So he would come upstairs and, people knew him as a celebrity film director and stuff like that. But he was coming up and peeling people's arms and taking names and taking names. So he was doing bits. But sort of midway through, I think about 23, 24, he was up one night and he had asked our mutual friend who was my coach, Ray Stevens, who was an Olympic silver medalist in Barcelona, and just said, hey, my assistant has now become producer. Do you know anyone that would be interested in coming to work with me, you know, do a little bit of training, doing some driving, doing little bits and pieces. And for a moment, I stepped away from working in physical gyms and health clubs and fitness centers and doing coaching to support what I was doing with judo. And I went and became Guy Ritchie's assistant. But by default of that, I also became his coach and did a lot of training with him off the jiu-jitsu mat. We were doing a lot of coaching in the gym. So even things like that, I stepped away from the gym and started working in the world of celebrity and whatnot. But I would always find myself training these guys, you know, and absolutely loved it. So pigeonhole me, call me a fitness guy, take no offense.
I think that's extremely fascinating. What would you say, what's the biggest difference between training a guy like that or Beckham versus just like a normal person in the gym? Like what did you see were the big differences?
I mean, David's sort of a unique character because, you know, like myself, like myself, I mean, David was next fucking level. He'd kill me for comparing myself. But so he had that, you know, he had that desire and want and passion on the pitch when he was competing. But anyone of that level, even after they retired, you know, when David and I met, we met at a gym and he was running next to me and he had been retired a few years since, but you could still see in his eyes, he's like, if he says he's going to do something or if he's being told to do something by a coach, whether it's a coach at a football pitch or a coach in the gym doing your S&C, or if it's your coach in your gym that he doesn't know that he's chosen to be there and that coach is telling him to do, you can see it in his eyes. You're looking in the mirror, he's running next to you. And like, I tell you what, this guy, I'm twice as big as him and I'm much fitter than him, but you put him on a treadmill, like just gliding like a stallion, just like, you know. But so that's kind of one difference in terms of, you know, training someone who has been at that level. Guy, for instance, I mean, he's quite a unique individual in the sense that he's a, you know, by profession, he's a director. So his attention to detail is, you know, like precision, and that goes with anything else that he does, even if it's in the gym. So, you know, trying to explain him to do something, and you know, he has that ability to listen, to look, to learn, to repeat and take on board any feedback. But you know, you get those attributes. You don't just have to be a professional athlete or film director to, you know, be able to act like that when you're given a task in the gym. You know, I've trained plenty of people in my time when I was doing PT in gyms, and you know, that would be from 18-year-old kids, boys and girls, to 75-year-old women, to, you know, kids suffering with, or, you know, with autism, or individuals with eating disorders, you know, and they all had attributes which, you know, it's all about how you tap into them. I said feedback a minute ago, and it's all about listening, right? That's a big part of the coach's job. You know, we've got the knowledge, we've got the experience, but we don't just want to sit there and bark at them saying, I know this, you need to do this, you need to do that. You need to listen to what they want and need to a certain extent. Don't get me wrong, right? So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they're also there, and they want to be told what to do, but you have to listen as well. So
That's what I was actually gonna ask a little bit, something that you kind of sparked a thought there. Like, I've talked to a couple guys. I've got a couple friends that train in the NBA in the United States, and they're the strength and conditioning coaches for a couple of the different teams. And one of the questions I always ask them, and I think you kind of touched on it, but I want to hear more from your perspective, is like, when you're working with like a high caliber athlete, or, you know, someone like a celebrity, someone that has, you know, I guess you could say has, you know, a position where they could be like, no, I know what I'm doing, or I can do this on my own. They actually tell me it's normally the opposite. I mean, there are exceptions, but it's normally like, dude, they're locked in, they're focused, they're wanting to optimize every second of the training. They're like really attentive to detail. Is that kind of what you've seen too?
yeah, I mean, they would have the ability. I mean, there's a couple of things there. There's a lot of those guys that, whether basketball players or football players, or even individual sports that have bigger teams. So judo is an individual sport when I walk out onto the mat, but my training is done with the boys and girls that were part of the GB team. So I think one point to what you're talking about, a lot of those guys, they like to be a part of something, right? They're,
Yeah,
you know, whether it's being with a coach or training as a team, they like that energy in that environment that stimulates them, to motivate them to get better, to chase. You know, for me personally, I used to love that environment. And there was one individual, he was my teammate, my club mate, but he was also my GB teammate. You know, so we were like this, number one, number two for years. But would I have been number one, or would I not been number two? Possibly would have been number 3 or 4 or 5 had he not been there to push me, right? And
for
to
sure.
compete against. Sorry, I distanced myself away from your initial point.
No, you're
But
good.
I think that's part of that sort of mindset. They do like to be told what to do. And they're just used to it. You know, some of these guys that are at the level they are, you know, they've been told what to do in the gym or by a coach from, like I said, when I started doing my judo from like 11 years old, 12 years old, and it's kind of all they know, you know. So to actually go to the gym on your own, you know, and count your own reps or do your own programming, and you know, is quite a task for someone that's never had to do it.
For sure. How much of your coaching and training would you say is physical? Because I know a lot of coaches I talk to, especially someone like you, I feel like you bring a lot more to the table, where it's like you're trying to dive into mindset. You're talking about lifestyle habits. Like you're teaching them more than just, hey, let's go bench, 4 sets of 8 today. Like what does that look like for you, and how do you approach that?
I think the first part of what you said is exactly that. Is just looking at a lifestyle, right? Don't get me wrong. There's a time and a place to go in and have a like hell of a session, just sweat, and you know, it's good for the ego just to humble yourself a little bit, to trash yourself in the gym. But that happens once in a while. But for me, it's looking at a whole. You know, you can't. It's what I was saying earlier about, you know, we have the knowledge to go to these guys to tell them what to do, but if they don't like what you're telling them, or they can't do what you're telling them, if there's no regression or scalability to progress on the exercises or the sets, the reps, whatever it might be, they're not going to hang around, right? So you have to look at what their habits are. You have to create new habits. You have to there's an element of fitting into their lifestyle to start with, just to get them going
For sure.
and create those habits. And then what you created then becomes their lifestyle.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Another thing that I want to get your thoughts on, because I think you could bring some value here, is, I love leadership. I love finding ways to make an impact. I love, making the people around me better and pushing them. I think one thing I've learned in this, I don't know if this is a secret, like I think a lot of people know this, but I don't know if we really double down on it, is when you truly want to lead someone or you want to make an impact, they have to trust you. And so how can you build that trust? How can you develop a relationship between a person? Like if me and you are going in the gym and I'm like, all right, we're going to get after it today, but you don't really trust me. We don't have a connection. We're probably not going to maximize that session. And so I guess my question for you is like, working with, whether it be high profile clients or low, just normal people that you work out with in the gym, like how are you developing that trust? How are you building those relationships so you get the most out of what you guys are doing?
I think the biggest is time, right? It's time
Yeah,
that you put in. It's time and the detail that you put in, and that attention to detail. Um, and that's something that I don't think there's anything else that the basis of trust, the foundation of trust. That's all it is, right? It takes time. There's a lot of people out there, and certainly the world we live in, it's so fast with social media and everything, and everyone's like wants to be best friends and do this and do that, but it takes time, and it's that attention, when you're in the gym with a client and making them feel that they're safe, that what you're talking about, what you're delivering and is considered. But then it's also, what you're doing when you step out of the gym, and letting them know that you're thinking about their program or their progression, and further educating yourself to benefit your clients. But all of that, it takes time. I think that's the biggest key to building trust. And then just, again, but it kind of falls into the same category as time. It's consistency, right?
mm-hmm, for
It's
sure.
just rocking up time and time again, however many sessions that person is doing, but it's consistency and time.
I love that. I think that's honestly, I agree. I don't think you could have said it any better. I want to know more about, so obviously you kill it from a fitness standpoint. You're training these people and it's amazing, but you also have a lot more interesting parts of your life. You've gotten kind of to the brand stuff. I know you're rocking your Puma gear right there, which is sick. I want to hear about that first, and then I'll dive into more of the stuff you probably do for other people. But how do you like working with Puma?
Yeah, I mean, they're a phenomenal brand. I'm very fortunate. I've been wearing their kit for a long, long time. And they reached out last year, just doing some bits. They were trying to get a foothold into functional fitness. They launched a big old training range with a fused shoe and whatnot, probably about 10 months ago or so. And I by no way have a hugely, I don't have a big following. I've got like 10K on there, but the guys that follow me, I think I'm credible in what I'm doing and
For
putting
sure.
out there, and whether it's fitness or the brand stuff that I do or whatever I do, it's I try to keep it real. So the people that follow me, I think they're good guys as well. So but they were trying to be, and we touched on it just before we hit record, and we were just talking about brands coming into the functional fitness space, and just there's a lot of brands out there that have a lot of money, and they just think it's simple. Oh, we can go for a run, we can do this, we can do some pull-ups, and they don't ever think about the community or the effort that goes in and the small nuances within those communities that make that sport what it is, and certainly with something like CrossFit, there's a lot of that, so they had a really good strategy to come into the market, and working with some individuals like myself. I feel like I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but myself, we've had like 10,000 followers or less followers, so there's some micro influencers and athletes that have 3,000 or 4,000, but they're doing bits, right? They're doing some great stuff, and they've not got that following yet, but on the ground, they're hugely respected in this industry.
Right.
Puma had the foresight to look at that and work with individuals like that. They're a huge global brand, have a lot of money, and could pretty much splash it around and get who they wanted, but they didn't do that. And they just get it. They're a great bunch. So yeah, very, very lucky.
I love that. They're making a huge push in basketball in the United States. I don't know if you follow that much, but I mean they've landed some really big athletes in the NBA, and it seems like they're really putting some money behind that too, like trying to grow the basketball stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the basketball stuff, I'm very lucky. They send some bits and pieces every now and then that have like the hoop stuff, which I absolutely love. But they've got some awesome stuff, like the performance stuff that they would have on the court for the shoes that the guys wear. But then some of the lifestyle stuff, it's
sweet.
a great brand. I love it. Yeah,
That's awesome, man. All right, well now let's shift gears a little bit. Same topic, but now you're not only are you representing yourself in your own brand deals, but you're actually helping other people with the fitness stuff, but also the brand stuff, doing some management. How did that come about? Like, how did you get involved in that? Because I know it's a little bit different than the fitness stuff.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. So my journey was when I spent a lot of time in the gym when I was competing, doing judo, like I was saying earlier. And I think by the time I retired, I just missed out on the Olympics in 2008 in Beijing. And after that, you're going to question me about it after, I know for sure. But after that, I jumped in the ring and did an MMA fight. I'll come back to that in a bit. After that, I just wanted to take a different journey for a minute and just see what else was out there. So, I was still working with Guy Ritchie at the time, and more focusing on the film kind of stuff. I was still doing a little bit of coaching. I was still in the gym a lot, absolutely love my fitness, but you've got to understand that from, 6 years old on a judo mat, and then from when it started, when I was allowed to, really start working out in my own time in the gyms, and my whole life was just carrying sweaty judo kit, sweaty training kit with a big bag that was the size of me on my back, running around London, going from coach to coach. So after I retired, I was just like, I just want to wear some real clothes, and I just try some other stuff. So that's kind of, I sort of walked away a little bit from being a full-time coach, but I still had a handful of clients because the love, the passion, the giving, the coaching, it was just a passion. But that's where it led into sort of the brand world. I started working with, I was in LA for a little bit. I had the fortune to work with Jason Statham as his assistant, which also meant I was training him and working on some of his films. And we used to work with a couple of guys over 8711 down at LAX, some of the best stunt team in the film industry, phenomenal guys. And it was quite funny because, you know, they would know me as a judo champ, come down, you're going to kill it, you know, you can show us some things that would look awesome on camera. So me and Jace would go down and I would go, listen guys, I've got it. Like, Jace, come here, like, cameraman, you stand there, do that, and I do this. And they would all look at each other and be like, yeah, that's cool. And I get it works, but it looks shit on camera. Right? So it's what was actually effective, you know, isn't always what looks good on camera. So
Right.
I hadn't even thought of that. You know, I'm 28 years old. Fighting's been my life. I'm now in the film industry working with these guys. And you're like, oh, okay. Because then they show it to you and you're like, that looks like dog shit, like really bad. And then they show you, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? So that was super eye-opening. But yeah, that's when I started working with talent. And then with those guys, that they were super good to me and I was very close to them, ended up in a lot of big meetings, working with brands, and I had that exposure from working on talent side and then dealing with brands. So moving forwards a few years, I then after LA and I spent a small stint in New York, I came back to London and wanted to set up my own thing, which was just as a consultant, me and my laptop in Soho House, getting going, you know, starting small. And I took on a huge client, which is Sony Music over here in the UK. I worked with them as the brand's partnership team. And we worked across the global roster of artists. So you're looking at Calvin Harris, to Mark Ronson, to some of the emerging artists that you won't know. I mean, no disrespect.
Yeah, sure,
and I wouldn't even know them as well if I hadn't worked at Sony.
right.
So then that's when the brand stuff really started taking off. It was a great ride. I was at Sony for a couple of years, but I was still consulting for a couple of fitness brands in London and just helping out here and there and just advising. So fitness was always there. And then after a while, I was like, damn, I love music. Music's cool. I love to listen to music in the gym. I love to listen to it at home. But, you know, I'm not a massive music connoisseur. I either know the track name or the artist. Rarely do I know both. So, you know, I'm sitting in these meetings, you feel like a bit of a fraud, right? You're like, oh, I don't know that. But I knew how to look after talent from the experience I had working with some of the, you know, top guys in the entertainment industry. So I stepped away and focused back in towards sport and fitness. So that's where that came about. I was just like, you know, I've been an athlete. I've trained athletes, trained retired athletes. I've trained athletes. David Hay, world champion boxer, in his prime for a few fights. This is a world that I know, and with authority and experience and with the want to make it a, you know, not better play, like, you know, add value to what's already an amazing industry.
Right.
So that's where it brought me back. So I kind of did a detour, came out of fitness, did a few other bits and pieces, then came back, and it's the best thing that I did. You know, I've got a bunch of guys that I work with: Megan Lovegrove, Elliot Simmons, Scott Britton, and Gus Vestostas. They are all, two of them are CrossFit athletes. One of them's a coach. One of them has a global foundation called Battle Cancer. And then I've got an individual, Harry Akins, who's the current 100-meter British champion. You know, so all of a sudden I'm back in this world of dealing with athletes, and, you know, I know what it was like to be an athlete, you know, giving your all and everything, turning up to training, dealing with selections, you know, that sometimes go your way, sometimes they don't, and how the emotions, you have to deal with that. And, you know, CrossFit was very similar in terms of judo, and actually GB Athletics, it's the same, where there's not a huge amount of money from those guys. You know, they're getting the support to pay the flights and pay for some training kit, but they're not paying enough where you've got to pay the bills and stuff like that. So coming back to talent management in sport and fitness I just felt like I was home.
I love that, dude. I want to be you when I grow up, man.
Hey, I'm not that old. Come on.
Dude, no, I mean, jokingly, but no, seriously, like I love how, I mean, you're doing everything I want to do. Like the combination of fitness, your passion, you recognize the importance of it, like in health, but then also like how you can make an impact there. And then also just the collaboration with business and bringing value to brands and just, I love everything you're doing, man. That's super cool.
Yeah, I'm very, very, very lucky. But it's a lot of people. They said, why didn't you stay within fitness? And maybe I'd be doing something better. Maybe I would have been more successful. Who knows? Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I went. I don't know. But where I'm at now with sort of this, what I feel to me is quite a rounded experience and got a bit of knowledge from talent side, from brand side, from sport, from an athlete, from retired athlete. It's quite a nice little mix and balance of everything.
I love that. I mean, some people are different, right? But I think you and I align. We have a lot in common where I can't, like, I can focus and lock in on one thing, but like I've got to have options. I just love doing stuff all day long when I can't, you can't do one thing all day long. So it's like,
Yeah.
all right, how can I, do this podcast, do, stuff I'm doing with Playbook? How can I do the stuff I'm doing with my brand, fitness? Like I think that's a fun life, man. I think that's when you can
finding those things that you're doing that can benefit one another, right? So
exactly.
hopefully, I know certainly from having a chat with you that I will go away and you've bettered my day and bettered my week and made me think about things that when I'm having a conversation with someone else, I'll probably refer back to this moment in time. So it's having those things in your life that you're creating that balance that make things, makes everything we do a little more accessible. Had I been just a personal trainer or an S&C coach and that's all I ever did and I just lived in a gym and I didn't understand, when an athlete or a celebrity or whoever it might be comes to me and wants some training, if I don't have any idea what that, their life consisted of, would I be so sympathetic towards their situation when they're, it's hard to be consistent with their eating, hard to be consistent with their training times. They're traveling all around the world, emotionally, the drain emotion it must have when one of these individuals, they step out and there's cameras or there's stories, whatever. Had I just been a PT and I wasn't exposed to any of that, I wouldn't know. But now I have that sort of insight, when I'm dealing with these guys or girls, I can program a little bit better, be a little bit more sympathetic to their needs. And hopefully that makes the whole journey and the process for these guys that train with me that much better.
I think that's incredible. That was one quick question I wanted to ask you about programming. So you're working with athletes from, boxers, film directors, former soccer players, like all across the board. In terms of programming, like, are you taking the time to really dig deep into the research of like what's best to optimize their individual goals, or is it more of like you guys meet, they're like, okay, I want to work on these foundational elements, and like how does that work, or how do you build out that process?
It's a little bit of both, right? So it's very different with when you're training an athlete, so, and they're in that zone and they don't really want to think. So when I was trained David Hay for we had a fight in 2012 in Derek Chisora heavyweight bout. That was his be all and end all. He didn't want to know the whys and he would every now and then throw a curveball and ask you, why are we doing this? Why are you doing that? So you've got to be on top of your research and you've got to have an understanding of why, or the cycle of strength or the cycle of power and the maintenance work, whatever it is you're doing, you've got to know why you're doing it so you can, when those questions come up. So, but, that's very different because they need a certain thing. I'm sure they would want to stay in bed a little bit longer, have a little bit of a nicer chilled session this day. It's not so much of what they want, it's what they need. If they've chosen to be an athlete and he's chosen to step in the ring, he needs to perform on July the 12th or whenever it was in 3 months' time. Whereas someone who's a retired athlete, they've done their stint, right? So although I spoke about earlier that, even as a retired athlete, they still may come into the gym with that sort of razor focus and want and desire to train hard, but they might not want a program which is you know, a 3-month program with cycles in there, and, you know, their session laid out for every day, their active recovery and whatever it might be. You know, they might just want to rock up and just have a little bit more of a, you know, a looser programming, but that's
Right.
all down to the individual.
No, that's super cool. And now kind of wrapping this thing up, man, I want to talk about your current training, some of the things you've been working on. I know you've got a black belt, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's like yeah, I got my so I got my black belt in judo when I was 16.
That's nuts. How long does that take? So from the time you started to about 16, is that like a normal time span?
Yeah, so it's about 10 years. It took me about 10 years in judo.
Wow.
The white belt is obviously the belt that comes with the kit when you buy the kit at the shop. But yeah, it took me about 10 years. But in judo, you can't be a black belt until you're 16.
Okay.
And that's just that. I don't know if it's the same in the American Federation, but the British Judo Association, it's 16 here. I like to think that I probably could have get it earlier if the rules were.
Of course.
But I got that, but it's and I was super proud. But about 5 years ago, I got my second black belt from Roger Gracie, and I think you know, because you were just saying about your roommate is, you know, he's a jiu-jitsu dude, but
Yeah.
the Gracie family is like the best jiu-jitsu family in the world. And then, you know, I'm fortunate enough to train with Roger Gracie, who, you know, is not only from the best jiu-jitsu family, he's not even arguably the greatest jiu-jitsu fighter of all time. So about 6 years ago, I got my black belt from him, you know, so I was like a
Crazy.
you know, kid in a candy store when you get that. Jiu-jitsu, to get your belts in jiu-jitsu, it's a really rewarding journey, and it is a journey, and it's way more sort of related to life and some of the goals and how we should look at life, as opposed to judo. Again, I don't want to discredit it, but, you know, I was strong and I was fit, and even at the age of like 15, 16, I wasn't like technically phenomenal. It took me a lot of hard work in the later years to achieve what I achieved. But, you know, to get your black belt in judo, you get to brown belt, and then you do your kata, which is kind of your theory stuff. You do that in your club, and your coach will sign it off that you know all the names to this and that throw. And then you go to a grading, and if you win 3 fights in the morning, you then get a lineup of 3 more fights. You have to fight 3 people back to back, and as long as you beat them, you then get awarded your black belt, which is fucking awesome, right? You've just had 6 fights, but 3 of them are like back to back. So at the end of the day, you feel super rewarded. But if you're strong and fit, and it depends who else has turned up on the day, you know, you can get a black belt. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, it's way bigger than that. It's like a journey that it will not take anyone less than, there's a few individuals out there that I don't want them to jump on, but there's a few individuals that have done it less than 10 years, but they say on average, it takes about 10 years to become a black belt, but to become a black belt with some presence, right? With, you know, knowing what you should know. But it's done, the grading system is done in a very different way, where it's done over, the coach does it over a period of time. So it's about consistency, application, your attitude towards the mat itself, towards your other jiu-jitsu family, you know, that are on the mat. And it's way more about that. So, you know, one night you might be training and the coach, the session's been done, and you will just be called up, say, you know, Bobby, here's your blue belt, or here's your purple belt, and here's a stripe. And it's awarded as you go. So you don't know how well you're doing until the coach pulls out a belt or pulls out a stripe and awards it there. So I think for me, the journey of jiu-jitsu is one that's quite a special one, because it's a lot of attributes that people should take into the real world, you know, but being, like I said, consistent, accountable, humble, modest, you know, and also be a little bit of a killer, you know, at the same time.
That's so cool. No, I love that. I mean, I think that's where sport and life are just, it's the parallels and the connections are just so cool, and seeing like all the hard work you put in to get that, and then obviously, you know, being excited about that, and then, you know, applying it to, I'm sure you're applying your jiu-jitsu, process and different things you learn from that to your clients that you work with? I'm sure you're doing it in some capacity.
Yeah, 100%. But it's not even jiu-jitsu. It's the same as you would do in the gym.
Yeah.
Like, you just keep turning up. You keep turning up. Some days are going to be bad. Some days are going to be good. But if you don't turn up the next day, you're never going to get better. So it's just about turning up, keep it going. And it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu. And it's the same application towards life and how you conduct yourself, So it's, certainly apply it in other areas.
That's good stuff, man. My roommate's been hounding me. He's like, man, you got to come with me one night and try it. I'm like, at the time when we initiated that conversation, I was still playing college basketball. I was like, dude, there's no shot. Like, I'm not.
It'd be a nightmare. How tall are you?
I'm
What are your
6.
stats?
I'm 6'4", like 200 pounds.
You're like my worst nightmare. I mean, you've got, like, the pull guard for the legs, just keep them out of the way. Spider guard, the grip to get over the top. If you knew what you're doing. Listen, next time in the US, I'm going to come by. I'm going to drag you and your roommate. We've got to go and put a gi on you and get a roll in.
Let's go. Dude, I'm so down. I'd love to learn more. And he would freak out. He'd be super excited. That's cool, man. Yeah, I'm currently training for a marathon, like I told you kind of before. And so that's kind of where my focus is right now. But like you, like I don't, I'd like to keep lifting. I like the hybrid kind of style of training. So I've been lifting heavy, doing some hypertrophy, but also running. But I want to hear about you. I know I'm kind of bringing this up without context on this podcast, but we talked beforehand. Like you ran a marathon, so you have some experience there. What was that like?
It was fucking horrendous.
Oh gosh.
I mean, listen, when it crossed the finish line, it was amazing. But I'm not a big runner. I used to do a lot of sort of mid-distance, not even mid-distance, like short distance. Like, the coach would have us down at the track. We'd be doing 400s and 800s. And then there'd be some 60s and some 100s in there. So it was all kind of like, don't get me wrong, 400 meters and 800s, horrible, because it's like it's like 80% of a sprint, right?
Yes.
But anything beyond that, it's a funny old thing, because it's a real different mentality. I think a lot of everything that I did was mainly reactive, right? So when I'm fighting jiu-jitsu or judo, I'm reacting to what someone is just about to do to me or going to try to do. So I'm doing something, whereas running, it's active. You're actively putting yourself out there on your own, one foot in front of the other for 5 hours is what it took me. And I'll give you some context in a minute. So it's like, it's a whole nother level of toughness, like mentally. So it was hard, man. A good friend of mine, she's also my client. She's had 3 kids and she wanted to do something for herself, and she's a hell of an athlete. And I don't mean like an athlete in the gym. I'm talking like an everyday athlete, right? She has the discipline. She's got the consistency. She turns up. She's a great person to coach. And she just wanted to challenge herself. And she has that uncle of hers has a charity in Rwanda. So obviously we're going to go and do the marathon in Rwanda to support the charity. Now, all my buddies, they've all got fucked knees and whatever. And I'm the one that's like the fittest and somewhat the youngest out of all of us. So they're like, would you like to do a marathon? Knowing full well that I hate running any further than like 800 meters. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm in. I love a challenge. I won't turn down a challenge, and however hard it is, it's going to benefit and make me a better person in some way, shape, or form. Halfway through the marathon, I wasn't so sure, but for sure. But yeah, I did that, and we turned up to the marathon in Rwanda, and turns out that it's part of the African trials, for the national African trials for, I don't know what they were competing for, but it was a trial, so the top percentage of finishers of that, they would move forwards to another tournament, to another race.
Oh wow.
But I was super excited to be there, and it was a race where it just went out 13 miles, 13.1, and then it came back. We left, we came out, you do a couple of miles flat, and then it was a gradient. Firstly, I went out way too strong because I was just like, super pumped to be there, super excited. And then we go down a decline for about 6 miles, and it was a big decline. It must have been, I don't know, -6 or 7%, or it was a decent decline. It was quite nice to do. And there's people out, I'm high-fiving people. I'm like, yeah, I've got this, no problem. And then I get to the bottom and I realize it's a turnaround. And that was literally 6 or 7 miles. So just before I got to the bottom of the decline, I'm like, fuck, we've got to do that on the way back up. And I'm looking back up like that, going, oh my God. Anyway, it's completely rural. You're running out in the countryside. It was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. But the mental toughness that people have to do stuff like that, you've got your David Goggins of the worlds, and, a buddy of mine just did 48 marathons in 30 days. And I just hats off to these guys, because, I sit there and I say, oh, jiu-jitsu or judo is like one of the toughest sports. And to me, it is in certain ways, but in other ways, I had a podcast, I had a bunch of music to play. I listened to a great podcast that finished. I had like 3 or 4 playlists to listen to. And then 3 hours in, I was just like, I don't want anything. Like everything was just bothering me. Earpods were bothering me. Like the emblems of like the embroidery on my shirt was rubbing my nipple. Like it was all just like, and it was just hellish to get through. But we did it, and I'm so glad I did it, and I'm happy that you're doing it. You're gonna smash it, and
thanks, bro.
Good luck to you.
Gosh, man, no, that's crazy. I've had a couple guests on recently that are either training for one or have done one, and everyone's had a little bit different experience. I think that's the most interesting thing you see is like across the board, people just have different experiences. But you make up a really cool point, like, dude, and there's nothing like endurance training. It's just such a different, like, it's a mind game. There's obviously the physical component, but like you have to be locked and dialed. Like you have to, if you let your mind wander, dude, it's over. You're gonna.
That's it. Like, in judo, you can't, you don't stop because someone's going to throw you, right? Or you stop, someone's going to choke you out. Like, so there's an incentive to, like, there's a immediate, like in front of me right here, right now, to not stop. Whereas there was points in the middle of nowhere in Rwanda, I'm like, if I just fucking stopped here, like, no one's gonna see. So people like that, and even like long distance swimming, or there's a guy here, he did a challenge where he swam around the entire UK, the coastline of Ross Edgley. So he did that, I mean, and by the way, he's an anomaly because he can lift some steel too, and he's got a set of lungs sticking on the treadmill. And then I was like, there's no way this guy's gonna swim, like he's gonna drown, like he's gonna sink, like he's jacked. And he went and did that, like, but that's all mindset. Not all mindset, obviously you've got to have the physical attributes, but
it's a big part of it,
portion of it.
Dude, this has been a really fun episode. You're a legend, dude. Thank you so much for jumping on this podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Listen, sorry we probably run over.
No, we are good, man. No, this has been fun. I'm excited to stay in touch with you and honestly probably pick your brain more off this episode. But thank you so much for joining the AIM podcast, man. I really appreciate you.
Oh, man. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.